Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Gabriel Jaramillo, Director of Healthy Communities here at the Vitalyst Health Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit philanthropic organization really focused on the intersection of the social determinants of health. I oversee our housing and transportation and built environment portfolios, and we are working in a nonpartisan way to try to address the housing insecurity and the housing crisis that's going on across the entire state. I'm really excited to have the Pew Charitable Trust team to discuss some of the national observations that they've made through various policy changes. So I'll hand it over to them. Thank you.
All right, Gabriel, thanks. Appreciate it. Good to be here and wanted to share some research that we've been conducting. Arizona obviously is in the midst of a difficult housing shortage. It's caused affordability problems, pushed homeownership out of reach, and pushed up homelessness. Unfortunately, Arizona is not alone. In other states and we see jurisdictions around the country dealing with the same problems. So we've been conducting research on the steps they've taken and how those have turned out to help inform policymaking and inform efforts to solve the housing shortage and the problems that it's caused. So I'll go ahead and share some of the research that we've been doing and what we found, and hope that it is helpful as Arizona confronts this problem and the housing shortage that has been plaguing the state. So big picture, about half of renters are spending more than 30% of income on rent. This is very unusual historically. Rents are much higher than they have been in recent US history. And a quarter of renters are spending more than 50% of income on rent. This is a serious problem. Once people are spending more than 50% of income on rent, they're at risk. They're at risk for displacement, they're at risk for eviction, and they're at increased risk of homelessness. So to have one quarter of renters spending more than 50% of income on rent puts them at risk. These figures are about the same in Arizona as in the US overall. In the US and Arizona, median rents and home prices have hit record highs, a record high in the past 2 years. And part of what's going on is that people are living in smaller households and the population is growing, but housing supply is just not keeping up. So 63% of US households have one or two people in them. That's much lower than household size is much lower than it has been historically, and far more households have one or two people in them. So this implies that we need more, not just more housing, but more housing that meets people's needs. Smaller homes, well located, and the core problem, the core issue driving all of these outcomes is the shortage. The US housing shortage is estimated at 4 to 7 million homes. We have not been building nearly enough housing, and that has led to these outcomes. And we see this throughout Arizona. It's not just one part of the state. It's not just one jurisdiction or two jurisdictions. This has become a statewide problem. And even if one jurisdiction takes a step forward to solve this problem, it's insufficient to keep up with the scale, because if other jurisdictions don't do their fair share and don't enable more homes, it doesn't solve the shortage. So affordability would only improve in one jurisdiction. And that points to the need for a coordinated response, and state policy is the most effective mechanism for ensuring that more housing can be built. Inventory is down. Even though Arizona's grown a lot since 2019, inventory is down 16%. So 16% fewer homes for sale. And when inventory is down, that means we're in a seller's market. And we've really been in a long-term seller's market in Arizona. And that explains why the median home price has gone from $258,000 6 years ago to $425,000 now, because there just aren't enough homes. Anyone who's bought or sold a home knows when there aren't many homes out there, it's a seller's market. And Arizona is in a long-term seller's market that keeps pushing up prices. The main reason is the lack of construction. There just haven't been enough homes built to keep up with the needs of Arizona residents. So we see that playing out even relative to the US in pushing up rents. It's only 8 years ago that Arizona was relatively affordable compared to the US, with median rent at 83.6% of the US median. And in just that 8 years, rents have shot up to 97.5% of the US median. So it's not just that the shortage in Arizona is pushing up rents, it's that the shortage is so extreme, it's pushing up rents more than in the rest of the US. So we see how this plays out with the median rent shooting up from $1,200 a month to over $1,800 a month in just 6 years. So while rents have gone up 40% in the US, which is a serious problem and has caused major affordability woes, they're up 52% in Arizona during that time period. 50% in Phoenix, 54% in Tucson. Rent growth like this is a strong indication that there is just not enough housing. It creates cutthroat competition, and it means that just like bidding wars happen to buy homes, then bidding wars can happen to rent homes. We're not just in a seller's market, we're in a landlord's market too, because the occupancy rate is so high since there aren't many homes available. Restrictive zoning is the main reason why this is happening. We're looking at Mesa, Tucson, and Phoenix all the way to the left. And data from the Eviction Lab categorized US cities in terms of how restrictive their zoning is, how hard they make it to build homes. Well, Mesa, Tucson, and Phoenix are all in the top 5% of the US for most restrictive zoning. What does this mean? It's hard to build apartments. If you want to build a home, you can't build it on a small lot, the kind that would hold a townhouse or a starter home. You have to build it on a larger lot because local regulations require that. This is not driven by consumer preferences because we see that this is law. Government is putting two thumbs on the scale in favor of the most expensive type of housing. A house on a large lot with off-street parking, whether people want it or not, whether they can afford it or not. Who does this hurt? Well, it hurts low-income residents the most. If we look over the past 7 years, yes, rents have gone up throughout the US, but rents have gone up the most in low-income areas. Because when there aren't enough homes built in high-income areas, we see high-income residents look for what's available, look what they can afford, they move into middle-income neighborhoods. Middle-income residents look for what's available, what they can afford. If there aren't homes in middle-income neighborhoods, they end up pushing into low-income neighborhoods. What happens to low-income residents? Nowhere to go. Displacement, doubling up, homelessness, eviction, but most commonly, ending up with a large rent increase. So this housing shortage isn't just harmful, it's regressive. There's another way. There are jurisdictions, and Phoenix is one of them, that saw a lot of housing come online in 2023, a lot of apartments come online quickly because interest rates had been so low a couple years earlier that a lot of apartments got going. And once they came online, then they actually pushed rents down because there were so many new apartments that to compete for tenants, it suddenly wasn't a landlord's market, and landlords lowered rents in response. But what is surprising is that rents for older, naturally affordable apartments called Class C, where low and moderate income households mostly live, fell the most. So even though rents for new fancy apartments fell 1.9% in Phoenix, for older, naturally affordable apartments, they fell 7.2% in Phoenix. This is the opposite of the regressive effects of the housing shortage that mostly hurt low and moderate income households. When there's enough housing coming online for everybody, it benefits low and moderate income households most because it takes the pressure off that housing stock. Instead of middle income residents pushing into low income neighborhoods, we see the reverse happen, where low income households don't have to compete for their own homes because there's enough coming online for everybody. What about Section 8 voucher holders? So people who have low incomes and they have a voucher to give them a chance at affording housing because they don't have enough income to do so. Well, we see that the foremost driver of whether someone with a voucher can find housing is just how much housing is in the market. In housing markets that are really tight, where occupancy rates are, say, 98%, it's very hard for somebody with a voucher to find a place. In markets that are more balanced, where occupancy rates are 91, 92%, 93%, different story. Voucher holders have a shot. They find homes faster, and they're more likely to succeed in finding a home at all. Even for voucher holders, the most important driver of whether they can find a home and how quickly they do is simply how much housing is out there, because that is how we reduce competition for each available home. There are places that have succeeded. There are places that have made it easy to build housing, and they've seen a lot come online. Minneapolis, New Rochelle, Portland, and Tysons are here as 4 examples. What did they do? They legalized apartments, mostly on corridors, so near commerce, near transit. Minneapolis eliminated parking minimums. They all made it easier to build in some way, and they streamlined permitting to make it simpler and faster to build. Well, once they did that, they all started producing housing at more than double the rate of the US. And because of that, they held rent growth to between 0 and 5% total over this 6-year period, even while rents went up 30% in the US. All 4 of those jurisdictions added households at a faster rate than the US, but they were able to keep rent growth down because they kept adding housing, and that reduced competition, so existing residents weren't displaced. Homelessness is sometimes treated as a different problem than housing affordability and then housing availability. But we see that the availability of housing and how much it costs is the foremost driver of homelessness. Let's compare Phoenix and Tucson with Houston and Minneapolis. We see that in Phoenix and Tucson, where housing was added at a lower rate than Houston and Minneapolis, rents soared. Houston and Minneapolis made it much easier to build. Houston reduced the minimum lot size. Houston and Minneapolis had simplified permitting. That meant they kept rent growth down because they were adding housing at a much faster rate than cities like Phoenix and Tucson. So even while homelessness went up in Phoenix and Tucson, it went down in Houston and Minneapolis at the exact same time. The reason is the difference in rent growth. Where rents go up, homelessness goes up. Where rent growth is contained, homelessness drops. Why does this happen? It's simply the availability of housing. How much is out there? How much competition is there for your own home? Well, if Phoenix and Tucson had built at the same rates as Houston and Minneapolis, we would have seen slower rent growth and a different outcome with respect to homelessness. In Arizona, we see that 74% of people in the most recent count who are going through homelessness have been homeless for less than a year. So we're not talking about just people who are in a situation where they're going through long-term homelessness. Homelessness is really below the bottom rung on the housing ladder, and it's what happens when people fall off the housing ladder. The main mechanism by which more housing decreases homelessness is it slows the flow of people into homelessness so that programs and services have a chance to get people out of homelessness, and housing costs are the foremost driver here. So we see the problems with homelessness in Arizona, especially in the Phoenix and Tucson areas, and we see that the increase in housing costs is the foremost driver. Minneapolis shows how this works. Once Minneapolis made it easier to build housing, then they started building housing at triple the rate of the rest of Minnesota. That held down rent growth compared to the rest of the state. And so even while homelessness was going up in the rest of Minnesota, it was going down in Minneapolis. Arizona can have this experience also, but more housing is a crucial part of the solution to holding down housing costs and reducing homelessness. So how would this work? What's the secret sauce for how Arizona can reduce housing costs? Well, we see that minimum lot size is a major driver of housing costs. This has been replicated over and over again in studies looking at minimum lot size. And look, it makes sense. If you're requiring people to buy more land, homes are going to cost more. If you give people choices and allow them to buy less land, allow traditional starter homes on small lots, housing is going to be more affordable. Once Houston reduced its minimum lot size from 5,000 square feet to 1,400 square feet, 80,000 townhouses came out of that. So the homes that came online are averaging around 2,500 square feet. These are townhouses, but they're affordable to middle-income households. These are true starter homes. Austin saw what Houston had done and how successful it was, and they replicated it. They shrunk their own minimum lot size from 5,750 square feet down to 1,800 because they saw the success and they wanted to have it as well. We see that the current kind of housing that is required in most Arizona cities, like Phoenix, like Tucson, like Mesa, well, it just costs more. In Houston, a detached single-family house runs about $545,000 on average versus $340,000 for a home on a smaller lot. So this puts it within reach of a middle-income household. You don't have to be a high-income household to buy a home in Houston because they allow homes on small lots. They allow starter homes. They're not excluding residents from homeownership who aren't rich. We can see this with homelessness too. During this 8-year time period, we looked at from 2015 to 2023. Well, what happened? Homelessness was going up in Dallas while it was going down in Houston, the two biggest cities in the same state. Main reason? Rents were rising much faster in Dallas than in Houston. Rents were still going up in Houston, but incomes had enough time to rise also, so affordability didn't get worse. So that way, Houston's programs had a chance to work, to get people out of homelessness because new residents weren't coming in all the time since affordability wasn't worsening. Same state, two biggest cities, homelessness soaring in Dallas, dropping in Houston because of the difference in rent growth, which amounted to more than $3,000 a year for a renting household. What was the main reason? Dallas didn't enact the kind of lot size reform that Houston did. Lot size reform worked. Houston was building about 48% more homes per year than Dallas was. And this added housing stock made all the difference. It kept prices and it kept rents from soaring the way they did in other places. And so they didn't have the same problems with affordability getting worse and driving up homelessness the way it did elsewhere. There are other benefits too. Look, a single family home on a large lot is the most water intensive type of housing. Homes on small lots use less water. Multifamily housing uses less water because when homes are smaller and they take up less land, they're more efficient. That means exterior water usage, but also new housing tends to install more water efficient appliances as well. And so we see that in Phoenix, homes in multifamily developments use 25% less water per capita and 45% less water per home compared with single family homes. Homes on large lots are the kind that uses the most water. Homes on small lots, multifamily housing, simply use less for reasons that I think are intuitive. Accessory dwelling units are also a reform that has a proven track record of success. And last year, Arizona became one of 14 states that is now is a state law to allow accessory dwelling units. But Arizona only legalized them in cities. And so there are large parts of the state that are excluded from property owners being able to have an accessory dwelling unit. This is unfortunate for property owners, but it's more unfortunate for renters. because accessory dwelling units cost less to build than other housing types, and so they have lower rents than other housing types. We see that in some areas, accessory dwelling units tend to be naturally affordable to people who are in less than 80% of the area median income. So here's a housing type that costs less to build, it's faster to build, and it's more affordable. So by enabling accessory dwelling units in counties as well as larger cities, that means people can have more housing choices and affordability can further improve by bringing more homes online. Over the past 2 years, in 2023 and 2024, we see a lot of states take steps to enable more housing through reforming permitting, just like Arizona did last year by making ADU permitting easier and by making some timelines shorter for rezoning and building housing in commercial areas. But there's another step that Florida, Tennessee, and Texas took in the last 2 sessions. And we've seen other states like Maryland and Hawaii move ahead with third-party reviews also. So because of limited capacity of local governments, sometimes by enabling accredited professionals, licensed professionals, to conduct reviews and inspections, that can speed up development timelines and bring more housing online faster. Because when housing gets delayed, it drives up costs for builders, and that ultimately drives up costs for buyers and tenants. So by speeding up timelines and having third-party reviews, that's a way to get more housing built and improve affordability by getting rid of bottlenecks in the process that discourage housing development. So what about public opinion? Because we've been discussing the benefits of land use reforms, but what does the public think? Well, that's something that I asked the former mayor of New Rochelle, New York about, because he oversaw one of the largest local zoning reforms in the US, and he noted that if you were to look at their public hearings and social media comments, you would think that everybody hated housing and that there wasn't support for the sort of steps that they took, which improved affordability and slowed down rent growth dramatically. But he noted that in his jurisdiction, the pro-development candidate keeps winning elections. And actually, when they did proactive outreach, they found that the majority of people did want more vibrant downtowns, more vibrant commercial corridors, and they were comfortable allowing more housing in their jurisdiction. We do see that the academic research that's been done on public input and on the processes used to solicit public input about more housing show that the people who are most vocal at community meetings often have much more negative opinions about housing than the community overall. And so the processes we use sometimes to solicit input via community meetings end up making the outcome less reflective of community opinion, not more reflective, because the people who show up are not representative of the community, either demographically, but also in terms of their attitudes towards more housing. So we see that in Arizona, and this is not from our survey, but we see that there's support nationwide, and just like there's support in Arizona for making it easier to build housing. So the second item down, right, allowing smaller single-family homes to be built on smaller lots to create starter homes, there's overwhelming support for this. So why do we see this disconnect between enabling more housing and attitudes toward enabling more housing, and then the perception sometimes from community meetings that more housing is not popular, and it's just different people who show up? So this proactive outreach, where we include everyone in the process via surveys and via outreach, shows that there's actually a lot of popularity for enabling more housing, and it's not just a one political party. In Pew's nationally representative survey, we see that attitudes among Republicans, Democrats, and independents are similar. All three groups are supportive of making it easier to build housing. And the reasons for that are straightforward. Improved affordability is the number one reason why respondents give for making it easier to build housing. The shortage is so acute and it's doing so much damage that they recognize it's time to take action. And the sorts of steps being proposed are broadly popular. because they would make a difference. And the idea of having more commerce near residents is attractive. The idea of businesses having more customers and employees nearby is attractive. And we just don't see the same type of opposition to allowing more housing when we do broad-based outreach and conduct representative service. And my contact information is here for more information, but it's been great to share this information today. And thanks to Vitalyst for hosting.
Again, thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it, and thank you for to the Pew team for this great information, especially as Arizona looks for solutions to address our affordable housing crisis and housing crisis in general. So thank you all for joining us again, and have a great day.